So a couple of you noticed I'm wearing my hair differently. Some of you didn't notice. Most of you probably don't care because how I wear is no business of yours. And I'm consciously copying my father's hairdo to befriend my receding hairline, to make peace with an old story I told myself back in third grade that my ears were too big and my teeth were too big for my mouth, and it would help if I had my hair down and covered things up a little bit and didn't smile and didn't show my ears or my teeth. My little story. I took the liberty of making the altar today about my little story. I was born the second of 6 sons to Bernard, Marcel Harst, and Nellie Harst, who were both third-generation colonial immigrants to Indonesia, born and raised in the shadow of the Great Depression, which was even more difficult in Southeast Asia than it was in America for many people. My parents, not quite so much. They were middle-class colonialists, so they still lived in a house with a cook and a chauffeur and a gardener because that's what colonials did back in the day. And then World War II came along and they lived through the horrors of Japanese occupation and prisoner war camp for their parents, seeing death and atrocities heaped up in the streets before their eyes. They lived through that and then lived through the Indonesian Revolution for independence, saw more atrocities, fled for their lives with my older brother and my mother pregnant with me and 2 trunkfuls of clothes and money that was supposed to be transferred over to the Dutch bank account but never quite made it. Got stolen in the process. So they arrived in Holland with relatively little. By the time I was born, the story in my family was very clear. It was that life was about struggle, that the world was out to get you, and that you better watch out. And you're probably never, ever good enough to deal with the horrors of life. And it's hard to argue with that story. It was born out of the Depression, out of war, out of horror that I can't begin to imagine for the comforts of my middle-class suburban life in America now. But I was born out of that story into a family of love. Both of my parents, gracias a Dios, are very loving, wonderful people. I was raised in a house where there was no lack of love, but there was a lack of money. And there was a lack of confidence that we could be enough to deal with life. That's a story I grew up with. Went off to college on a scholarship, full ride to Trinity, got all full of wisdom and understanding that I was more important than anybody. It was the 70s, peace and love and me, it's all about me. Yeah. Post-college, my new story, the story was that I was all about expressing myself. I became a professional musician. I fulfilled my obligations to my scholarship, and I did what my parents wanted till the day I graduated from school. The next day, I embarked on my career as a professional musician. The next month, I got married to my high school sweetheart. It was a disaster. But it was all about me. The story was about me, the importance of expressing me. Very good story. I liked it. And after 6-7 years of being a professional musician and then recording contract in London and then losing the contract, getting married, losing the wife, getting confident, losing the confidence, I finally I had this life-changing day, the day after John Lennon died. I went as a memorial service, and the speaker said, we should all take up the banner and do John's work, and blah, blah, blah. And I got this clear message from God that I'm supposed to serve God through music and by being willing to hold the banner for peace and justice and oneness. That's my work. Yay! It's all about service to God. Good story. I lived out that story for a while, and it was a wonderful story. It was a story that said I was supposed to do God's work and do the work of conscious change, but don't make any money at it because, people who are working for consciousness and God aren't supposed to make money. That was a good story. I lived that one out really well for a long time. Still am. Story changed a little bit after our son was born, Mateo was born. Suddenly I went from being about me and service to God to changing diapers, service to little squealy baby, never could get enough food or enough attention. And at the same time that my baby son, Mateo, was growing, the circle was growing, and it also wanted more food and more attention all the time. And now, in the last few months, I've been spending a fair amount of time looking at my story and asking myself, what would it be like if I lived a story beyond story? What if what my story was no longer defined who I am? What if it didn't matter if I wore my hair back or down or didn't have any hair at all? What if it didn't matter if I was a good dad or a bad dad in my judgment? What would it matter? What if it didn't matter how I was raised? What if I was no longer limited by my parents' belief of who I could be, should be, would be? Good boy, bad boy, rich boy, poor boy. What if I were just a man being present in the moment? What if I took seriously the scripture from Psalms that I embraced the day I graduated as a spiritual director in my spiritual director internship class 10 years ago that said, create in me a clean heart and a new and right spirit in me. Create in me a clean heart and a new and right spirit in me. What if I took seriously that opportunity, that invitation to be clean and fresh in this moment and not be bound in story? I don't know. What if? I'm just asking questions. I don't have any big answers. What I do have is the awareness that my willingness to look at my story and live beyond my story is not about me. It's not about being a better me or a more successful me or a happier me, because it's not about me. It's about we. It's about my willingness to understand that to the extent I can open and be part of a bigger story, that's not about how comfortable I am or how famous I am or how rich I am or how poor I am or how uncomfortable I am. It's not about any of that, which is a very countercultural story in America in 2014, where it's all about me. You deserve a break today. Just do it. Coke brings fun to life. Yeah. What if I took seriously the understanding that our profoundly dysfunctional cultural story about division and separation and domination as being the reason to live? What if I took seriously the awareness that the strongly dysfunctional cultural story about consuming more and more in order to have more and more, to feel more and more and be more and more, is not a story that works for me, it's not a story that works for my culture, and I can't do anything about it out there, but I can do something about it here, asking new questions of my life, making new choices for my life. The great philosopher, contemporary psychologist Jean Houston says, we're at the end of one era and not quite at the beginning of a new one. We do not yet see it, but we can feel a new story in our bones. And the hounds of heaven are going woof, woof, woof at our ankles. We're at the end of an old story and not quite at the beginning of a new story. Can't see it, but we can feel it. We can feel profoundly that there's something wrong with the story of our culture. That as nice as it is to cheer, "Go Spurs, go," as nice as it is to think that the Eagleford shale is bringing new prosperity to South Texas, it's not about the Spurs. And it's not about there being more oil or less oil. And it is about how am I willing to show up in my life from a new place to help create a new story in our society that is sustainable, that is healthy, that is not built on domination or separation or remuneration, but built on inspiration. Being inspired, filled by Spirit. Because the scriptures of all times have told us that's really the only game in town. And those scriptures are calling to us anew, I believe, in this moment. Isaiah 43 says, "Behold, I do a new thing. Behold, I do a new thing, and now it will spring forth." And as I understand the scriptures of the Bible, they were written for you and me. Not just once a long time ago, but for somebody, by somebody, but are constantly being rewritten now. And so this scripture from Isaiah, "Behold, I do a new thing, and now it will spring forth," comes out of my willingness to not have to know what that new thing is, or not have to plan what's going to spring forth, or how it's going to spring forth, or how much it's going to make me, or how it will provide for me in my retirement. Those are really superfluous questions. The real question is, am I willing? Are you willing? Are you willing to show up? Rethink the story, however enticing your story is, how beautiful your story is about what your all-star background as in high school or in college, or the miserable childhood you had as an abused child, or the horrible first marriage and the second marriage, or the surgery. Those are all perfectly good stories. The cancer survivorship, that's a good story. Being an all-star straight A student, that's a good story. But it's just a story. It's past, and it need not form, much less restrict me. I say bravely. And you know, and I know it's not as simple as that. We are creatures of habit. We've been telling the same story for quite a while about our wonderful childhood or our dysfunctional childhood, our wonderful marriage or our terrible marriage, our great kids, our terrible kids. We have stories. We love our stories. We fill whole scrapbooks full of stories. This whole scrapbook, I've held on to this scrapbook for years. It's got all my good reviews. I was on the front page of the entertainment section. And I really realized recently what a trap that is. It took it very recently. I'm embarrassed to say how recently. I realized that whatever I was in the past has nothing to do with how I show up today. See what I mean? That story will fall down on you every single time. And I'm telling you my story as if my story matters. The question is, what's your story? What's our story going to be? I don't know. But that's my question. I'm going to keep asking, because I'm sticking to it.